On the morning of December 12, 1985, shortly after takeoff from Gander, Newfoundland, Aero Air Flight 1285 stalled and crashed, scattering wreckage across an area of 1,300 feet long and 130 feet wide. On board were 248 members of the U.S. Army returning to the United States after completing a peacekeeping mission in the Egyptian Sinai desert. All 248 passengers, as well as 8 crew members, were killed instantly, becoming the deadliest aviation accident ever to occur on Canadian soil. Aero Air Flight 1285 was chartered by the U.S. Army to transport members of the 101st Airborne Division back to their home base in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. On Wednesday, December 11, 1985, Army personnel boarded a McDonnell Douglas DC-8 constructed in 1969. The flight that was to take them home was made up of 3 legs, with refueling in Cologne and Gander before heading onward to their final destination in Fort Campbell. The first 2 legs of the journey were uneventful. When the aircraft arrived at Gander International Airport, passengers departed while the aircraft was being refueled, and a new flight crew boarded the aircraft. Witnesses reported that the flight engineer conducted an external inspection of the aircraft, after which the passengers reboarded. The DC-8 began its takeoff from the Gander airport, and it was at that moment that events took a turn for the worse. Shortly after takeoff from the Gander airfield, the DC-8, carrying almost 250 U.S. military personnel, started to take flight. Witnesses reported that the aircraft showed significant difficulty gaining altitude and suddenly descended, hitting trees and breaking up just 3,500 feet beyond the departure end of the runway. It smashed into an empty building and the plane exploded, starting an intense fire fed by the large amount of fuel that was on board for the final leg of the flight. All 248 passengers and 8 crew were killed instantly. There were no survivors. Responsibility for the accident was claimed by the Islamic Jihad organization. However, this claim was dismissed by Canadian and U.S. intelligence agencies as an attempt by the terrorist organization to bolster recruiting numbers. An investigation by the Canadian Aviation Safety Board, the CASB, found that the probable cause was due to ice that had collected on the wings of the aircraft. They believed that after landing, the plane was exposed to freezing and frozen precipitation capable of producing roughening on the wing upper surface. Pilots hadn't asked for the plane to be de-iced, even though icy conditions existed. Shortly after liftoff, the aircraft experienced an increase in drag and a reduction in lift, which resulted in a stall at a low altitude from which recovery was not possible. Human error could also have been a contributing factor. Officials believe it was possible that the pilots could have misjudged how heavy the plane was due to the amount of material that each soldier would have carried aboard. The miscalculation in weight would have been more than enough to keep the plane from achieving proper lift and causing it to crash. However, 4 of the 9 members of the CASB review disagreed with the findings, asserting that there wasn't any physical evidence to prove that ice had been present, and that the crash patterns displayed didn't match what would have been expected if the crash was caused by ice. The alternative theory presented argues that there could have been an explosion which caused the accident. Witnesses stated that they saw a bright glow emanating from the aircraft before it struck the ground, and autopsies determined that many of the soldiers had a significant amount of carbon monoxide in their bodies, which suggested that a fire explosion had occurred before the plane had crashed. Additionally, scrap pieces from the wreckage were shown to have puckered outwards, indicating that a blast had occurred inside the plane. At least one member of the CASB maintains that the explosion was a terrorist attack caused by an onboard explosive, but others attest that the explosion was caused by top-secret weapons that were being transported by the U.S. military. Eyewitnesses had reported that several large wooden crates were loaded onto the plane in Cairo, and that weapons, missiles, and ammunition boxes were seen amongst the wreckage, even though the U.S. Army denies that there were any explosives or ammunition aboard. Rescue workers responding to the crash noticed unusual hotspots that couldn't easily be put out by water. Several of the rescue workers also began to complain of health problems in the days following the event, with symptoms that were similar to radiation poisoning. Following the event, US government officials also appeared to be acting strangely. For unknown reasons, the crash site was bulldozed within just 3 months. The remains of the plane were quickly disposed of and buried in a dump. The US Army claimed that it was simply done to discourage souvenir hunters. Unfortunately, the true cause of the incident involving AeroAir 1285 may never be known, as the onboard flight data recorder was an older model which didn't provide enough information to accurately aid the investigation, and the cockpit voice recorder failed to record the events due to a faulty microphone. The mixed findings of the Canadian Aviation Safety Board undermined the Canadian public's confidence in the CASB. This was further compounded by a subsequent review of the report, which ruled that the available evidence didn't point to either of the suggested causes. As a result, the Canadian government decided to disband the CASB and created a new agency, the Transportation Safety Board of Canada. The conflicting opinions also led to delays in changing the airplane de-icing procedures, although these were modified following the deadly crash of Air Ontario Flight 1363 in 1989. A memorial to the 256 victims of Flight 1285 has been erected overlooking Gander Lake, and another memorial was erected at Fort Campbell. As of today, the true cause of the crash of AeroAir 1285 remains unknown. But the scar from the flaming wreckage still remains visible where 250 people met their unfortunate end.